I mean, think about any professional athlete or anything like that. They have coaches, right? Like you can get to like a B plus level on your own. But if you really want to get to like an A level on stuff, you need to have a coach. And Liquid and Grit's built off of that kind of mentality too. I mean, everything is edited, everything's shared, and anyone can comment on it. And we encourage that. And we look at it as that component of it. You can't create a great book, research paper, document, idea without, I don't believe, without having somebody critique it. And that's the same concept of yourself.
Welcome to the Rise and Play podcast. I am Sophie Vo, your host and leadership coach. In the show, my wonderful co-host and I sit down with influential and diverse leaders from the gaming industry to hear about their leadership journey. Not the well-polished stories, but the real stories. The up and down, the breakthrough, and the failures. Or should we rather say learnings? Each episode will transport you into a magical space of vulnerability with our guest. And together, you'll be reminded that no matter how hard it is, you are not alone in this journey and find the courage to keep going. Come and join the ride. Let's begin. A former product leader who worked 16 years in the gaming industry, I know how difficult it is to get reliable and usable player insights. The logistics of scheduling, recruiting the right players, collecting and reviewing feedback, it is all time away from game development. But you know how fundamental it is to test assumptions with your core audience and iterate at a lower cost before marketing an unproven game. I am proud to announce Playtest Cloud as our key partner, as I have believed since day one in the quality of their service and their mission to democratize player research. Playtest Cloud can take the hassle out of organizing game research yourself and delivers results within 48 hours, allowing you to implement changes in time for your release. Having been a long-time user of the platform, it is the industry standard used by top AAA and mobile studios, and now they also support indie developers with special pricing. Working for a year on the wrong game is an expensive mistake, and you can de-risk it now by investing in your player research. Check out the show notes for a free trial and learn more about Playtest Cloud. Hi everyone, welcome to the Rise and Play podcast. I'm super delighted today to have Brett Nowak on the podcast. I've been following a lot the work from Brett for the past, maybe it's embarrassing to count, but 10 years as I was working as a product manager in the industry. And so for the ones who don't know about Brett, at least you should know about his company. So Brett is the founder and CEO of Liquid and Grit, a leading product research and consultancy firm specializing in mobile gaming. And prior to founding Liquid and Grit, Brett was a leader in big game companies that you know of, such as Zynga, and leading the product management part with 15 years of experience in the gaming industry. So expertise in product management, game design, data analysis, which with Liquid and Grit has enabled top gaming companies to refine their strategy and drive revenue growth. And that's how I know about Liquid and Grit. And today, at least from my network, talking to other founders, I can say that also Liquid and Grit has been one of the main resources mentioned when it comes to the work around product management, and so has become a trusted resource for game developers. So again, I'm not doing here a promotion, but I'd like also to highlight the good work because I have used your services in the past, and that's not anyway the content of the episode today. I know you've participated in episodes before talking about product management, but with Rise and Play, we focus on the journey of founders and leadership. So welcome, Brett. I'm so glad to finally have you on the show.
It's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's begin since you're on the peak of energy of the morning. And before we get into the culture, what you do with Liquid and Grit, I'm curious to always go back to the origin story of a founder. And what was that time, which I'm sure you remember very well still, when you've decided to create Liquid and Grit? Where were you in career? You know, what was happening at that time? You thought, okay, I'm going to start my company.
Yeah, I've always wanted to start a company. So it probably started pretty early on. When I was at business school, I said I'd get into an industry, learn it, and then start a company. So I kind of had this plan. And then my uncle and father-in-law both started similar businesses. So when I left Zynga, And when joined a smaller gaming company, I realized they didn't have as many resources as we had at Zynga. They weren't sharing reports and information and doing talks and all that stuff. And I was surprised, and also thought, wow, it would be great if other companies had those resources that Zynga had. And that's when the idea started. And I spoke to my uncle and my father-in-law about their experiences. And then it took me a couple years to figure out how I was going to do it. And that's what I was recently writing about on a LinkedIn post, actually, is I left gaming for 2 years. It's not really on my LinkedIn profile, but I joined a tech company and then started Liquid Grit on the side when I was working there.
Okay, so actually that's quite a relevant topic, because I don't know if you followed the news of over tech and, layoff in games. This is a question that has come more to mind, for people who have had a decade of experience, quite senior, sometimes leaders, and they're kind of forced out of a company and asking themselves, okay, should I start my own company? So that's interesting. What was the thinking during those 2 years? Like, why not jumping all in? Like, I don't know what kind of advice you received on starting on the side. So you had an intention, but you were still like having that day job. I don't know if you were in product management in tech. So what was the thinking during those 2 years as you were preparing?
Yeah, it was long-term plan. And one of the motivations was I wanted to own 100% of the company. So I didn't want to raise any capital. The second was I had 2 kids. I think the third was on the way, and I live in California. We had a lot of expenses, and I didn't want to have my dream of starting a company really impact my family. I didn't want to say, oh, we were living on, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for 5 years, and then it worked. So all of those things combined, I thought the best route, which I still think is a great one if you're thinking about it, is to get a job in a company or position that's kind of cushy. And that's somewhat what I did. I sort of leveled down to maybe like a senior product manager level, and I've been a director, and I was outside of gaming, and outside of gaming is much slower. And that allowed me to get an income and then have the mental strength to work on this on the side. And I saw a lot of people going into consulting and then thinking they were going to start on the side, but that's really hard to do because it's so hard to do consulting. So that was my thinking: have a full-time job, get a salary, and then kind of start it. I also think it just takes a lot longer than you think. So having some type of income allows you to spend more time on it to help it grow.
I'm fully aligned with this, by the way. Before I started Rise and Play, I did start also on the side of a job with the intention of having my own asset as a business. And I didn't feel like work. I don't know how it felt for you, but for me, it was more of the time I would invest in things I was really interested in, learning, doing. And then you test, you experiment, a bit like product management, right? And then as you can see, the confidence, like, okay, there's something there, I can go all in. So I'm curious, what were you doing during those 2 years that you tested, experiment to figure out, like, okay, that's the moment where I'm ready to go full time?
Yeah, I had the idea and I was talking about it for a little while. And I kind of tell people, once you vet an idea for a little while, what I recommend is to stop talking about it, because for whatever reason, talking about it kind of empties the energy tank. And what I did was I just at a certain point said, okay, just don't talk about it. Don't talk to your wife about it. Don't talk to your friends about it or whomever. Bottle up that energy and just try it. And also don't tell anyone about it, because that way, if it fails, you don't really have to explain to anybody. So I just bottled up that energy, and then would just go down to kind of like our it wasn't our basement, but it was like a low, dark, cold room with a desk, and I'd work on it. And I built the first report and then went to try to sell that. And I think doing it that way allows you to fail. If you fail, you don't have to explain it to anybody. You just move on to the next idea. And I think a lot of people kind of stick in the like, well, I have this idea, I think it's really great. And they do that for a very long time. And I think that's the worst place to be in. The better place to be in is you try it and you fail and you can move on to the next idea. In my case, I tried it and it worked. And that's the ideal case scenario. So that's what I did. I'd say just after you vet it, I mean, you can talk to a bunch of people to vet the idea, but then once you do, just bottle up that energy. Don't let it out.
How far were you in the journey of those 2 years when you started to sell your report? Like, but talking about it to friends and talking about it to your prospects, your leads, which is a great way of testing. Like, it's very even like an interest. What was the journey? Were you also on the journey of selling before you say, okay, there's a business case here, or you were already like deciding, okay, I'm going to give it a shot?
Yeah, I was pretty far along. And I always say, try to make money as quickly as possible, because that basically tells you you're moderately sane, because the whole time you're thinking, am I insane? I had this idea. Am I sane? And I ended up selling a report in something like late October. And I remember that November, December, I don't think I would have made it through that period to Christmas and Thanksgiving had I not had 2 paying customers. And that got me through, and then just sort of grinded it out for the next almost 2 years. And that 2 years was really hard. I wanted to quit all the time from my day job. But mentally, I told myself it was harder to keep my day job. I really wanted to go all in. And I think I was making somewhere over $150,000 recurring revenue with the subscriptions before I left my job. And then I also got a severance from my job when I left it, because they had like an opt-in layoff. And then I was also talking to a company about consulting. So I got sort of asked to leave a little bit from the tech company, got a severance, and then rolled into a consulting project for 20 hours a week. So I had that income. So 20 hours a week, I would make money from the consulting. And then the rest of the time I would spend on the subscription, which was a decent amount at that point. And it was recurring. So I knew I was going to make it. And from there, I was definitely making more than I was in my job. Prior to that, though, I was making a full salary plus the recurring revenue from the subscription. So yeah, I was very far along. And I would encourage people, if you can do it, like do it really a long time. In fact, I'm reading a book on Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, and it's wild. He went back and became an accountant for a bunch of years while he was starting Nike. It was called Blue Ribbon at the time, but it's like, you imagine everyone starting this company in this like romantic way. And I think reading books and hearing stories as you're doing on your podcast, like makes you realize how many bumps in the road or, duct tape they used or things that they did just to make it work.
Yeah. So I appreciate, thanks for sharing the story, because it's very, again, relevant, where easily 10,000 people right now, especially in the gaming industry, who are asking themselves the same question in that crossroad. How do I start? What I take away from what you shared is the intention. I want to build my company for independence, and we'll get back to this point, but also not being unwise financially, because it gives you a mental space, security, right? There's the reality of the demand of life, especially if you have a family. So I hear also often in the conversation, I don't bear to take that day job that I'm not feeling passionate about. I mean, keeping eyes on the price, where it could be a way, and you can also be super transparent that you're not going to be there forever in that intermediary bridge job, however we want to call it, but it's still skills that you offer to the market to create value. That's what it is in the end, a job. And then while you work on your other longer term plans, but that's a good idea to build that on the side until you find what is that thing you can sell, grow, that takes you to revenues, because that brings to my second point. And I see that also a lot in companies being formed, VC-backed. They are backed before revenues, right? We see VC-backed, investor-backed. I'm also pro more bootstrap. It's like, if you can't prove yourself that you can actually sell something that is valuable for the market, revenues, it's like, why would an investor also want to invest in that? So I find it interesting today that it creates a bit more of that wisdom into entrepreneurship, like where you really sit and ask yourself, how can I create value? Because revenue is more, the answer to that. Like when you are not hiding behind the money or the name of something else, it's just you with what you have to offer, which is very vulnerable. But then it builds the confidence, like you saw as well with the value you created with Liquid and Greta.
Yeah, what I would recommend, and my father-in-law did a great job of teaching me this, is I would really think about what you're motivated by to start the company. It sounds kind of cheesy, but knowing who you are and why you're doing it is super important. And for me, it was making all the decisions was a really big component of it, and doing some unique things with the business and controlling my own time and things like that. So from there, then look at the different business models that there are, there's only a few. And one of them is Bootstrap. The other is VC backed. There's probably 3 or 4. From there, you can kind of narrow it down. VC backed didn't really work well for me because I wanted to have full control. So it's almost better to do process of elimination. So I eliminated that. And then from there, I would say the business model is really important, because the business model is also going to have a huge impact on what your day-to-day is and reflect who you are. I'm very risk averse, and I didn't want to put a lot of capital in my business. If you have those two as anchors, again, if you look at the business models, there's probably only 10 to 15 business models that you really can adopt. If you say those are must-haves, you're going to eliminate almost all of them except for maybe 2 or 3. From there, then you can decide which one's best, or even do a combination of 2. And that's what I was talking about. I was doing a recurring revenue subscription model and consulting. Both of those are business models that don't require a lot of capital. You can get cash flow fairly quickly. And that fit into that sort of requirement or anchor that I had, that I wanted full control of my company. So I think a lot of people go within the idea, and then they let the idea drive all those things. And that can be pretty dangerous, because then all of a sudden you're in a business model or a business that doesn't really fit you as a person. You can do that way. It obviously works, but I think the other way is a more strategic way to do it.
Thanks also for sharing this approach, like having the clarity on why, like the way you verbalize it. Maybe it seems natural to you, but I can tell you many founders who don't. And it's not a critique, but it's just, when capital can come in easily, why doing the effort of thinking about it? I mean, it's not the case these days, but it was in some time. And eliminating exactly the business model that may not support, what are your priorities of life, and ownership on the time or control of the company are a very important question, actually. And you mentioned also the risk, right? So where you may have to go on a lot of high cash flow until you see the return. If you have a lot of capital upfront, so then it limits the kind of business you can do. So it's more about, I understand here that the priority was more in thinking how I want to do business instead of being attached to what I'm actually doing. And the what is more flexible than how I work. Leading then to the what here, how did you converge to doing liquid ingrid and creating reports for companies? Was that more a process of trial and error research, or you already had a vision about it when you started to think about your business?
Well, like I said, I had an uncle and a father-in-law who had started similar businesses, and their life seemed really great. They both did very well and were kind of semi-retired and seemed very healthy. So I thought to myself, that seems like a good way to go. So that really helped. It did fit with what I was talking about before. And I agree. I think humans, for whatever reason, prefer to just take action than to stop and think about what they really want. And I see that all the time with applying to jobs and starting businesses and whatnot. But I find that once you know what you want, it's easier to get that than when you just sort of go through and take action. In terms of what, I think this was pretty deliberate, but I don't want to over romanticize how deliberate this was. I think looking back, it sounds better. But what I say to people when they talk to me about ideas is, I think no matter what you start, you're going to have competition at some point. And if you think in terms of what are you going to be a top 10 person in the world or top 20 person in the world starting, I think that's a good place to focus your energy. And for me, I was already a product manager, so I had experience in the industry. I am a decent writer. I have an uncle and a father-in-law who started a similar business. I have a half an MBA from Dartmouth. So that's a great way to kind of think about what to start, is sort of look at yourself as an individual and go, what components about me are unique? And how can I kind of piece these two different things together to get into that like sort of competitive advantage?
It's really interesting. We never had that conversation before, but I see a lot of resonance with what you share, because I went through the same process actually. Even like the ownership on my time. That's why I do what I do today. Sometimes when I ask that question to people, like, what can I be in the best in the world at doing that thing? And it's a very strange question for people to ask themselves that question, because it's like, I'm not that arrogant to tell myself it's not about being, but it's about the intention. Exactly what are the unique traits or the experience and the crossover experience and all those things that is going to be very hard to do exactly what you can do. And but the fact that you went through the same thinking is funny. And now I understand also how I relate so much of how you built Liquid and Greta. This time bringing us together.
I think also knowing what you're bad at helps, right? And
yes.
So I think if you don't like a certain aspect or something like that, or you hate it, then you have to solve for those problems too. And I've sort of been blessed with knowing I'm really good at stuff and knowing I'm really terrible at other things, so that allowed me to kind of be, oh, okay, I'm pretty good at this. Like I'm pretty good at writing, or I'm pretty good at doing something every day. I'm not really great at these other things. So I'm not really great at like details and things like that. So I need some editors and things like that. So yeah, I think that's important to add on.
Yeah. And knowing yourself totally. And you complement yourself in the business with people who, I'm not also that detail oriented, by the way. So I do have people like an editor, like the podcast, to do it, because it's like, it's very painful. So it's about the energy, right? Where do you put your energy? And getting into the core of the business. So we went over the what quickly, but then the big piece here is the how, right? So you are building your business, and I've read some of your posts over the past years on how you run the teams, how you work, and everything is very much you know, with your lens. So I'm very curious how you thought about, running the business, forming the team, even maybe the legal structure. If you could tell us more about how you started, and then we can go through the journey like after 10 years, but how you started.
I worked at this tech company. I really hated it. And so I would email myself notes about stuff I hated. And I actually just went and looked and found one from 2015.
Wow.
And the title was Reminder. And it said, like, I hate stupid meetings. I hate commuting to work. And I hate when I have managers who are like belittling me and treating me like I'm an idiot. And I hate meetings where the loudest people make decisions. I wrote all these things to myself, and then I'd come home and I'd read them, and that would get me all fired up. And I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to work on my company because I'm never going to have to I never want to deal with this crap again. And Liquid and Greta, we're not going to do this stuff, So I always say I was way more motivated to not have that anymore than a Ferrari or any of that stuff. Like, I'm not a materialistic person. I'm wearing a hoodie, and, like, I just didn't want to deal with that stuff. So then when I started it, I had a full-time job. So I had to do a little bit of unique stuff. I had to do remote. We couldn't really do meetings and things like that. But then I really just kind of visualized aspects of the company, and I really just questioned everything. I just sort of questioned every single assumption about the company, whether I needed to have meetings, whether I needed to have a co-founder, whether I needed to have office, whether I needed to see resumes, like everything I just kind of questioned. And because I didn't have a lot of time and I didn't want to put a lot of capital in it, a lot of things I threw out to reduce the costs and risks. So, for example, hiring is one of the biggest risks for small companies. I mean, you have to make a huge investment in someone that you don't really know a lot about, and a ton of time and onboarding them, interviewing, all this stuff. And so I took that as sort of a first principles, like, well, what do I really need? I just need someone to do a task, right? And so I backed into that and went, okay, I just need a contractor to edit, or I just need a contractor to put together a PowerPoint deck. That allows me to reduce so much risk on the company, because if they're not good, I can just turn them off. And so I sort of just like went through every component of the business and thought about it that way, as opposed to, every business has all hands, or every business has one-on-ones or management meetings, all that stuff. I also think you're going to do this for a very long time. I'm almost coming up on 10 years. So you got to love what you're doing and I'd be excited about it. And so just make sure you hold on to those things, because if you start adopting all those things as the founder, and then all of a sudden you're doing all the things you can't stand, it's already very difficult. And now you're doing all these things you don't like. That's very hard to do every single day. And you're going to have to do this every single day for a decade or more. And I think people are always like, well, it doesn't work for me. And blah, 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 blah. I'm like, dude, I'm not trying to hire everyone in the world. Okay, you like meetings, or you want to get an office or whatever. I mean, Liquid and Grit isn't going to be the only company in the world, right? it needs to fit really well for a certain type of people. And I'm going to make the assumption that there are more people like me out there who just want to get up, get their work done, go home, get paid, have autonomy, be treated with respect, don't really want to go on meetings a lot, like are a doer, get fulfillment from that. And those are the people I need to find to hire. Right. And there's probably 10, 20, 100, 1,000 people like that. And there are. Right. And this culture is amazing for those people. I wouldn't put myself in this category, but I'd say the people I hire in this category, super talented, super smart, not well understood, and they had a hard time finding jobs in the market because of those things being the focus and the premium and like such an important part of the hiring process that they get overlooked. And at Liquid and Grit, because we don't have interviews, we don't look at resumes, like we don't require you to go to offsites or happy hours or fit in or whatever. We hire these people that are really great at some of them. I mean, they're all wonderful people. I love them all, but they don't necessarily fit in that box, but they are so smart and talented, and they're overlooked. So they're just like, wow, this place is amazing. I get paid super well for what I do. And they just don't care about that other stuff. And those people really thrive at Liquid and Grit. It's not for everybody, I understand that, but it works for us.
Mm. I'm very fascinated by cultures because it's such an expansion of the founder, it's so personal. So and I just love to see different versions of it. A few points I highlight here, which is also an inspiration for others who are considering, again, building a company, because, again, there's a lot of visibility on the company, the playbook, right? And everything that you share, like you need to have a team, meetings, one-on-ones. And yes, it serves for a certain reason. What am I trying to achieve here? What do I need? And so you cut all the rest, like no playbook, like you start with basically no rules and you create whatever rules are serving the business. So it's like almost an act of creation in a company, in a way of working and operating, which is very refreshing because in businesses, we have to evolve all the time with how people work, what we're doing with the work. So there's not actually rules to say, as long as we decide as humans to create those rules. So I really like that you were not attached to this. And also for the people who join, yes, this assumption is correct, and it's not like you need to hire millions of people for the 10, 20, 30. So that was a reasonable way of thinking about the business. How many are you, by the way, today?
We're 8 full-time and 30 contractors. Wow, and then we have contracting companies that work with us as well. So we have like a dev team, like a web development team and things like that on top of that.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so through that journey with the intention of exactly hire or do like the profiles, the people, the way of working that you need, over those 10 years, what were the things that stick in those principles and the things that you had to evolve, question to fit more today's market?
Yeah, a lot of them have both stuck and evolved. One of the principles I started with is that I saw a lot of companies try to change their culture later on and have such a hard time doing that. And that was one of my, I sort of built it off thesis statements. And one of them was, it's very hard to change culture. So we had maybe 3 people and they would send me emails sometimes that were like 3 paragraphs long. And I would email back like, this is way too long. And they were probably thinking, dude, I sent you 1 email this week. Like, relax, you're getting 3 emails a week. But to me, I was like, okay, I have to set this culture now, because if we're 30 and then I'm saying that's 30 people I need to convince to stop doing it. I also wanted it so that it was really adaptive and could scale and adjust. So I sort of built it off the thesis that is a concept called OODA loops, which is observe, orient, decide, and act. And it's essentially a military strategic framework that basically, if you can respond and be more agile than your competitors, you can win, because war and business are really chaos. I mean, you predict for what you think the future is, but very likely the places that you're going to be in are going to be chaotic and unknown. And essentially, you want to build an organization that can respond to the unknown very quickly, while also responding to what you think is the known, which is kind of a like a weird thing to think about. But this is the kind of stuff that I literally obsessed over, and people would sort of say, this or that to me. And I'm like, I've spent thousands of hours thinking about this. And what people sometimes do is they'll take like the arm of a human, which is, I think, like all businesses are sort of like an organism, and they'll go, well, that wouldn't work. And I'm like, yeah, that arm wouldn't work on you. But if you think of it, and I think as a founder, you kind of have to think of it holistically, then it all makes sense. So that's a long-winded way of saying, what are some of the things that worked for us? I think being very disciplined about our culture was something that has worked with us, and something you should like continue to just like, you have to be really intense because it has to kind of water down. So if people do stuff out of character, for example, one of my leads was like, oh, I interviewed this person on a call. I was like, what? You cannot do that. Like that just breaks. He's just like, what? Like I call this person. I'm like, just breaks the whole system, because they're all so interconnected. And a little thing like that seems meaningless, but it like everything is connected. So having very specific rules for each communication channel has been very effective. So Slack is time sensitive. Email is asynchronous. Comments are specific to products or documents. That has been very effective. I think hiring blind has been very effective for us. I think using contractors has been extremely effective. I highly recommend doing a hybrid model like that if you can, depending on what government, rules have been effective. I think having a very strong internal documentation system has been extremely effective. We've evolved that over time, although recently it hasn't been as effective as I would like. Test-based hiring has been extremely effective until the introduction of ChatGPT. So we had to adapt to that change, but that was extremely effective. The other thing that we do really well, that the system is really built on, that's a huge difference between Liquid and Grit and other companies, and kind of the basis of how it works is that we hire someone to do a specific job. Whereas most companies hire a marketing lead or a product manager or a developer. We try to break down the operations into tasks, which allows us to really focus on hiring someone who does that task extremely well. So we hire an editor, we hire a writer, we hire a researcher. We do find that if that person is excellent at that thing, they're typically excellent at a lot of other things. And we really like versatile people. And when we're done with that, we usually send them to do something else and they apply the same exact thing to that other thing. But by, again, knowing exactly what you want from a person and hiring for that skill, it really allows you to reduce a lot of costs around hiring and onboarding and finding great people. Now we're doing a hybrid model, full-time hires for a lot of people who've been with us for a long time. We have them do a lot of different things, so they're really versatile. We're trying to get more engagement. We're trying to have more meetings. I'm definitely getting pushed to be more outgoing on that side. So those things have certainly changed.
So it's evolving. One point of reflection is for this kind of culture, the way you started it, exactly a lot of discipline and clarity and structure in a way for this to be consistent and repeated until it's adopted. Especially if you want to derail from the model of what's known, you have to exactly repeat the routines. And I'm curious about those moments where people with good intention, they come with some legacy, right? They come from that company, that corporate, and with their rules. And so that discipline will say, no, this email is too long. No, don't do interview. How did people adopt this way of working? Did they absorb it? Or sometimes it didn't work for many. It's it's too much reprocessing of the brain. I'm curious about the adoption.
This system was adopted pretty well because we focused on contractors, and contractors want that. They opt into that world. They don't want to be a part of a company. They want to get their work done, get paid, and go home. So the system worked amazingly for them. And that's why our retention on people who have hired, I think we've had one partially regrettable departure in a decade. The employees that we just onboarded, I think the average probably tenure for them is over 5 years. For those people, this is the most ideal situation, right? I pay on time, I give them complete autonomy, I document everything so that they have access to it. I let them make decisions that are in their framework. I give them challenging work, I pay them well. We sort of set it up so they can move wherever they want, live wherever they want, work whenever they want. I mean, to your point, it does reflect the owner. I'm not the most disciplined person. I don't want to, again, make myself to be some fantastical person. I mean, anyone can start a company. It's not like insane, but God gave me the ability to do something every single day for a decade. I was obsessed with hockey for 25 years and I did it every single day. I've worked on Liquid and Grit probably every day for a decade, and I don't work crazy hours. It's not me, but I do it every single day. So that just fits with me, right? Mm-hmm. That just Liquid and Grit, that system works well for that type of personality. Other people can work 15-hour days. I can't, right? So another system might work well for them. I mean, again, you're getting the high caffeinated version of Brett, but a couple of years ago, I sort of was like, well, what am I really motivated by now? Because in the beginning, what I wanted to do was make $1 more than I did as a salaried employee. Like that was my goal. And that's why stripping things down and thinking that way, as opposed to I want to start a business, is a good way to go, because you can always like build it into the business that you want, but ultimately you want to make $1 more than you are as an employee. At least that's what I wanted to do. But then like 2 or 3 years ago, sort of like, well, okay, I kind of did that. Like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I motivated by, other than feeding my family or paying the bills? And what I came to was, you're essentially creating a world that I want to be able to like go on beyond me, that people work at it and are like, wow, this is amazing. And this creates happiness, creates value for me. It's a wonderful place to work. And that's kind of why I'm doing it at this point, other than making enough money to live in California and have 3 kids and all that stuff.
And it's a discovery journey, right? So you start from the surface motivation and then you discover along the journey what was really behind, I can see that. Which leads also to the part I wanted to explore on how you see your business. Like I hear some elements of it where that thing you can do every day, and I could imagine every day for the rest of your life, right? So that's what is the journey. How you see the business, like for the next, you've done 10 years and going forward, like what is that thing you keep doing? And also you are not having that separation, which is also the very, your way of seeing the world and how you see the work. But there's not that separation. So I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, the whole work-life balance thing comes up and all that. And I don't see a separation between work, life, health, family, hobbies, whatever. Everything, to me, everything is connected. And I give this example as kind of a funny reminder of it, which is I used to listen to these podcasts of entrepreneurs. And it was interesting because a lot of them eventually, if you listen closely, would talk about how they were divorced. And in California, if you get divorced, you lose half of everything you own. And so I always sort of joke, like, if you're really thinking about all the risks of your company, you should really invest in your marriage, because half of your company could be broken off for nothing. Like, you don't, I mean, these guys and women didn't like generally have great families, and they didn't have a great relationship with their kids. And I was thinking, yeah, you may have made 50 million, 100 million, $200 million, but how much of that would you give up right now to have your family back and have a good relationship with your kids? So for me, that wasn't really a great trade-off. And that started making me really think, like, bragging that you work till 11 o'clock at night, I think is somewhat of a cop-out, because it's sort of like, well, why are you working till 11 o'clock at night? Mm-hmm. And you're trading one thing for another. You're trading making this company for the relationship with your wife and kids. And when you go from there, everything becomes all connected. So again, I think when you start your own company, you get to play around with these ideas. And I encourage you to do that so that you love that you have your own company. I mean, if you want to take 100% of the time off, then do that. But if you don't, then, don't.
Yeah. It's funny because I used to have also more of that separation when I was employed, because the work would become a burden a bit in what I would be doing. Always a trade-off of time for where I actually feel fulfilled. But if you actually work is the fulfilling part, there's less of that separation, because, that's what you do by being you and doing you. So I find also more, as you own your business, to shape it in the way that is respectful of your life, because it's such a part integrated of you. And that's how you also strip down the business to how can I make it, integrated in my life. And we create those silly rules. Well, I should not be working on the weekend. Why is that? I mean, I also work a few hours on the weekend, but I don't see it as work. It's really a perception where it's like, that's where I have energy, I have inspiration, I write down notes, and evening I'm out, I want to prioritize time. You just create the roles that fit you. So that's also inviting, I think, for redefinition of business, hearing stories like yours.
I mean, I think it applies to a job too.
Yeah.
Trying to find things that you get excited about, I think is challenging, but also super important. I used to do it at Zynga and find little pet projects that were going to get me really excited. And they generally create a lot of value for me and the company. So it's not different. I think I learned this from my first boss in business was Pete Parsons, who is on the board at Bungie Studios. And I was fortunate enough to work for him. One of the major things I learned from him is that he came to work every single day excited, energized, and fun. Every single day. He walked in Monday. I'm sure he had some crap to talk about from his weekend, but he didn't. He just came in fired up, excited, told a funny story, got us all fired up. And you think, oh, well, I could do that. I could do that every single day. You can do that every single day. And I learned from him, if you do that, it's amazing how contagious that is and how much people appreciate that and they value it, particularly if you're like a product manager or a leader or something like that. And you come in and you're fired up and excited and you're not talking about, my weekend was, I didn't get any sleep last night. It's like, yeah, but like bring it, and that kind of discipline pays off. So that's something I learned from him. And I think you kind of have to figure out ways to do it, because once you start coming in, regardless of whether you own your own company or you work at a company, that's going to really like predict which direction you go in,
Mm. How do you face, the different challenges of being alone as a founder, which, again, another rule, everybody's like, you shouldn't be a solo founder. You should have a co-founder. If you're willing to share also, what are the supports you had? You mentioned whether personal or psychological. If you're willing to share, I'm very curious to hear more.
The mental side of running a business is very challenging. I framed it as when things happen every 3 weeks, I've guessed or I've experienced that are really uncomfortable or can be uncomfortable. That's the cost of owning my own business. Like that's the cost of having all the benefits of it. If you don't want this feeling that you're having right now, then go back and be a salaried employee. Now, it doesn't mean you don't get those feelings as an employee. I think you just generally get them a little bit more when you run your own business, because people don't really sugarcoat things. Like the feedback, the responses, like none of that is put into a nice little email, and your
Yes.
emotions aren't really like considered and things like that, which is, fine or whatever. So I kind of framed it as like, yeah, this is what I got to get myself through. The other thing is, like I said, I think you want to think of it holistically, your health, your relationships, your activities. There's no point in starting a company and dying or being extremely unhealthy. I mean, the basis of life is health. So don't compromise your health for the business. And then, as you alluded to, I have had a psychiatrist for the last probably like 7 years, and it's been probably one of the most impactful things in my life. I think it's basically a life coach with a lot of academic background and expertise. You can do an advisor or anything like that, but in my experience, and I meet weekly for an hour with this person, and I find it to be incredibly helpful. And I think, one, it's sort of like, yeah, people are worried about talking about it. I'm not worried about talking about it all the time. I'm fine talking about it. I think everyone, if they can, should get somebody to talk to that person is dedicated to you, right? Like,
Yeah.
And that's where friends or people like that doesn't really work. You want that person to be like, okay, I am the focus for this hour. And, mine is, he's been amazing in so many different ways. And I think that also allows you to kind of get a lot off of your mind before you go home or interact with other people or whatever. The way that I see it is that you're essentially I sort of think of it as like a sieve, and everything that happens in your life is going through this formed like sieve in a way. And unless you spend an hour or more dedicated to examining that system and thinking of ways to change it, you won't change it. And your experiences in business or your experiences at home or your experiences wherever, they're all getting put through the same like system. And so if you're talking about something at home, or you're talking about something, it's all the same system. It's just a reflection of you as a person. And it's extremely hard to change who you are. So if you don't really dedicate yourself to changing and also working with someone who's like good at helping you do that, you're unlikely to change in my experience. So that's been incredibly valuable. And then having a support network helps too. I think I didn't do a great job of this, but having advisors is a really great way to go if you can find them. I think that's super valuable. I don't think you have to pay them or give up equity or anything like that. You can find those pretty easily. Everyone's willing to help, but that's incredibly valuable too.
And thanks for sharing as well that part of the business, because, as I do also the coaching, it's exactly what you share. I mean, I enter through the door of helping, supporting the business, but really what it is being that sparring partner who has undivided attention on what's going on with you, right? And no one in your life can take that role for free, not even a partner, not even a friend, but that's what most people do. And it is important to hear also what has been helpful, because there's a stigma where you need help, but I think it's just responsible where you examine yourself. And especially, I'm sure there's a lot going on as you have your business to exactly what you see, you can change, adapt, adjust. But what you don't see, then you keep, keeping the system as is in autopilot.
Yeah. I mean, think about any professional athlete or anything like that. They have coaches, right? And, someone told this to me and I kind of live by it, is like, you can get to like a B plus level on your own. But if you really want to get to like an A level on stuff, you need to have a coach. And Liquid and Grit's built off of that kind of mentality too. I mean, everything is edited, everything's shared, and anyone can comment on it. And we encourage that. And we look at it as that component of it. You can't create a great book, research paper, document, idea I don't believe, without having somebody critique it. And that's the same concept of yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a big fan. And I've used coaches as well in different areas and even with business.
Yeah, love it. On the note of not necessarily optimism, but looking forward, since you have, the business and the life like you want, you have what you want now. So what are you looking forward to? Is like, what could be more? I don't know, in the future. What makes you excited more even in the future?
Yeah. I mean, I think creation is like a human need to feel fulfilled. So, I mean, I have a long way to go before I feel like Liquid and Grit is fully created, at least in the vision that I wanted it to. Like I said, my goal is to kind of like create this like system that can live without me, essentially, and kind of grow and form new ideas and new concepts and evolve, and people can love working there, and it kind of like goes off into the distance. So that's what really excites me. I think there's some really cool product stuff on the horizon as well. I'm very excited about AI and the application of that. And then, the gaming industry is just filled with wonderful people. So I continue to feel blessed to be a part of it. And we're definitely going through a tough time, but it's like the gaming industry is like Finn Gordon said, it's been like 40 years of people doubting it's going to grow anymore, and it always does. So I'm confident it will. So I'm excited about that. What's next?
Yeah, evolution. It will continue to grow, but in a different form. And that's the part of the unknown you talked about. But trusting also what are the human needs, right? So, which is what we do as business. Thanks a lot for sharing all the, I'll say, wisdom, because to me, there's a lot of reflection you've been putting in, intention into how you build Liquid and Grit. And I was a testament of that today with how you talk about it. So just wanted to acknowledge that. And it was really nice to connect with you that way through the podcast. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, it was really fun to chat about it.
Yeah. Take care, Brett. Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Rise and Play podcast. We keep growing our community of conscious leaders across the industry and beyond. If you want to join this movement, please share the podcast with other conscious leaders, because we have so much more we can learn from each other. And if you want to accelerate your growth, I offer creative leadership coaching and workshop, plus other free resources that you can find on riseandplay.io. I can't wait to connect with you. Have a great week, and remember to take care of yourself. Until the next time,